And I also wanted to focus on the shark fishing industry because currently on planet Earth we're killing over 100 million sharks every single year. But before I went out to photograph this component, I sort of wrestled with the notion of how do you make a picture of a dead shark that will resonate with readers. You know, I think there's still a lot of people out there who think the only good shark is a dead shark. But this one morning I jumped in and found this thresher that had just recently died in a gill net, and with its huge pectoral fins and eyes still very visible, it struck me as sort of a crucifixion, if you will. This ended up being the lead picture in the global fisheries story in National Geographic, and I hope that it helped readers to take notice of this problem of 100 million sharks. And because I love sharks, I'm somewhat obsessed with sharks, I wanted to do another more celebratory story about sharks as a way of talking about the need for shark conservation. So I went to the Bahamas because there's very few places in the world where sharks are doing well these days, but the Bahamas seemed to be a place where stocks were reasonably healthy, largely due to the fact that the government there had outlawed longlining several years ago. And I wanted to show several species that we hadn't showed much in the magazine, and worked in a number of locations. One of the locations was this place called Tiger Beach in the northern Bahamas, where tiger sharks aggregate in shallow water. This is a low-altitude photograph that I made showing our dive boat with about a dozen of these big old tiger sharks sort of just swimming around behind. But the one thing I definitely didn't want to do with this coverage was to continue to portray sharks as something like monsters. I didn't want them to be overly threatening or scary. And with this photograph of a beautiful 15-foot, or about 14-foot, I guess, female tiger shark, I sort of think I got to that goal where she was swimming with these little bar jacks off her nose, and my strobe created a shadow on her face. And I think it's a gentler picture, a little less threatening, a little more respectful of the species. I also searched on this story for the elusive great hammerhead, an animal that really hadn't been photographed much until about maybe 7 or 10 years ago. It's a very solitary creature, but this is an animal that's considered data deficient by science in both Florida and in the Bahamas. You know, we know almost nothing about them. We don't know where they migrate to or from, where they mate, where they have their pups, and yet hammerhead populations in the Atlantic have declined about 80% in the last 20 or 30 years. You know, we're losing them faster than we can possibly find them. This is the oceanic white-tip shark, an animal that is considered the 4th most dangerous species if you pay attention to such lists, but it's an animal that's about 98% in decline throughout most of its range. Because this is a pelagic animal and it lives out in the deeper water, and because we weren't working on the bottom, I brought along a shark cage here, and my friend shark biologist Wes Pratt is inside the cage. You'll see that the photographer, of course, was not inside the cage here, so clearly the biologist is a little smarter than the photographer, I guess. And lastly, with this story, I also wanted to focus on baby sharks, shark nurseries. And I went to the island of Bimini in the Bahamas to work with lemon shark pups. This is a photo of a lemon shark pup, and it shows these animals where they live for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives in these protective mangroves. This is a very sort of unshark-like photograph. It's not what you typically might think of as a shark picture, but you know, here we see a shark that's maybe 10 or 11 inches long swimming in about a foot of water. But this is crucial habitat, and it's where they spend the first 2 to 3 years of their lives until they're big enough to go out on the rest of the reef. After I left Bimini, I actually learned that this habitat was being bulldozed to create a new golf course and resort. And other recent stories have looked at single flagship species, if you will, that are at risk in the ocean as a way of talking about other threats. One such story I did documented the leatherback sea turtle. This is the largest, widest ranging, deepest diving, and oldest of all turtle species. Here we see a female crawling out of the ocean under moonlight in the island of Trinidad. Now, these are animals whose lineage dates back about 100 million years. And there was a time in their lifespan where they were coming out of the water to nest and saw Tyrannosaurus rex running by, and today they crawl out and see condominiums. But despite this amazing longevity, they're now considered critically endangered. In the Pacific, where I made this photograph, their stocks have declined about 90% in the last 15 years. This is a photograph that shows a hatchling about to taste salt water for the very first time, beginning this long and perilous journey. Only 1 in 1,000 leatherback hatchlings will reach maturity, but that's due to natural predators like vultures that pick them off on a beach, or predatory fish that are waiting offshore. Nature has learned to compensate with that, and females have multiple clutches of eggs to overcome those odds. What they can't deal with is the anthropogenic stresses, human things, like this picture that shows a leatherback caught at night in a gill net. I actually jumped in and photographed this, and with the fisherman's permission, I cut the turtle out and it was able to swim free. But you know, thousands of other leatherbacks each year are not so fortunate, and the species' future is in great danger.